Land has been a commodity, and expansionism has been relevant throughout the course of history itself. The people and government of the United States was a country around the 1900s which had thought that it needed to expand itself and competes economically via the Philippines for the upcoming century. The Treaty of Paris was later signed to end the conflict between Spain and America, which liberated Cuba, Guam, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines from Spanish hands, but only gave independence to Cuba. The Filipinos concluded that the Americans were going to facilitate them on an ongoing war against Spain to procure independence, but the Americans had diverging intentions. The U.S. policymakers wanted to annex the Philippines that came with diverse motives, such as having more commercial opportunities in Asia, feared that the Filipinos were incapable of self-rule, and the fear that another country with great power may take over the islands. In a way, the Americans treated the Filipinos similarly to how they treated the Native Americans. The Americans and Filipinos both fought for their own causes. The Filipinos fought to secure the land which their ancestors lived upon, but the Americans fought for trade and expansion within their economy and government, which led to bloodshed.
The Filipino people were constantly striving to drive out the Spaniards from the Philippines via a resistance group led by General Myung, also known as Emilio Aguinaldo. The rebels were severely outmatched by the Spaniards and retreated into the hills, which ended as an early failed attempt. Later on, in 1897, Aguinaldo accepted a bribe from Spain to go to Hong Kong. It can be argued by some whether or not Aguinaldo was a hero or a traitor. However, he did end up returning to the Philippines, but this time things were different. He had came along to help Admiral Dewey and the Americans to fight against the Spaniards, which ultimately will result to help out the Philippines. But the Filipinos couldn't be more wrong. The Independence Day of Philippines, also known as Araw ng Kalayaan or Day of Freedom, was and still in present day is being celebrated on June 12th. This marks the day when the nation gained its independence from the Spanish rule on June 12, 1898.
The Filipinos thought that the Americans would just pack their bags and leave. That was not the case, as the Americans had something different in mind. The Filipinos also later came on to realize this, which sparked a raging war between the Americans and the Filipinos. Many more had died in this resulting war. The Philippine-American War was marked by two phases. The first phase was from February to November of 1899. This phase was dominated by Aguinaldo's attempts to fight a conventional war against the better trained and equipped American troops. The second phase was the Filipinos' shift to guerrilla-style warfare.
The Spanish-American War was officially ended through the Treaty of Paris signed by Spain and United States and France on December 10, 1898. The bloodshed had come to a resolution that ended with a favorable compromise for both the Americans and the Filipinos. Along with the peace treaty, it forced Spain to cede all claim to Cuba and to be responsible for the costs that they have done. Spain also ceded Puerto Rico and Guam to the United States. Spain demanded the United States to pay them $20 million for the Philippines due to the monuments and public works they have constructed. U.S. President William McKinley decided to pay the cost.
Now we will show a video of the Filipino Special Forces today.
Before a soldier can wear the legendary badge, he must first prove he is cut out for the job. Each Green Beret is molded through the most rigid training in the Philippine Army. Golpe Duro, or Strike Hard, is the war cry of the Special Forces Combat Qualification Course. This has the best training for jungle warfare.
What we can take away from this video is how much the Filipino soldiers use their tactics from guerrilla warfare today in their special forces and how much they have developed from the past. The Filipinos did not like the idea that the Americans would have authority over them, which led to rough conflict between the United States and the Philippines. This was called the Philippine-American War, which has been discussed in the conflict section of this video documentary. The Treaty of Paris ended the conflict between Spain and the United States. However, it became a gateway to another conflict between the Philippines and the United States. Filipinos used the Treaty of Paris to liberate them from Spanish hands, but later insurrected against the Americans as they realized they were only a change of foreign rule instead of absolute liberation to gain an autonomous rule. After years of vicious war, the United States slowly gave Philippines their independence through peace treaties. The first step was by a policy of attraction by United States Governor of Philippines, William Howard Taft, administered to the Philippines to attract the majority of the Filipino population to the United States rule on the year 1900. United States politicians disliked the policy. The second step was the promise of eventual independence to the Philippines through a written law called the Jonas Act in the year 1916. It was formerly known as the Philippine Autonomy Act of 1916. Years passed by when the United States finally granted Philippines their independence on July 4th, 1946.
There are many different ways that people of the United States and the people of the Philippines viewed this war. The Americans thought of this war as an insurrection, but the people of the Philippines thought of this as an all-out war for their independence from American rule. The soldiers who fought on the American side of this war had treated Filipinos unfairly. The American soldiers had treated Filipinos suspected of insurrection very cruel. The Americans resented the Filipinos' barbaric tactics in guerrilla-style warfare. The Americans considered this war to be over in 1902, but the fighting had continued throughout the next 20 years. American and Filipino relationships had started to improve. Filipinos had lacked a stable government, but the Filipinos provided a naval base and allowed the United States to trade towards the growing markets of Japan.
This is a video of how Philippine and American relationships are still getting stronger today.
The Philippines will soon give the United States military access to 5 military bases at strategic locations across the country, including one on the island of Palawan, close to China's Nansha Islands. U.S. Ambassador to Manila Philip Goldberg says it's part of the Asia-Pacific rebalancing strategy to increase U.S. military presence in the region.
The Filipinos had become more stabilized and had a good communication with the United States. In a way, America educated and toughened the Philippines through experience and bloodshed to what they are today.